I created this repo called Common Interview Topics, and I'm going to be filling it in with stuff. If you go to GitHub and go check out Mid and Jerry, GitHub Mid and Jerry, it's going to be under Common Interview Topics. So I'll be able to push this up there, and we're going to be covering 3 topics: REST API, Java Streams, and SQL queries. You're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to be asked one of those questions. So we're going to just do a deep dive, and I'm going to try to immerse you as much as possible into all of this so that you guys can master it. They're all pretty straightforward and simple. Maybe SQL queries, I always forget SQL queries, but they're pretty straightforward. If you can understand all of them and are very comfortable with them, then you can feel, I would say, 60 to 70% confident going into the interview. The final thing you're going to need is just coding practice itself, and that just means you go to HackerRank or LeetCode or one of those other programming sites and you just practice on them. But all these other topics, you'll be able to talk to them very confidently, and you'll be able to at least do well on the technical interview portion where you're, talking face to face. On top of that, your bug wars experience is just amazing. So, like, I'm getting to the point now where I'm getting asked questions and I have no idea what the answers are, just because you guys are going off in so many different directions with things, which is awesome. It's kind of like I'm becoming obsolete, which is really good because that just shows what kind of growth you guys have. So that's a very positive note. So for this, we're going to just focus on these 3 topics. Remember, you might still not get the interview even though you master these 3 topics, just because they like giving you hard questions during the technical assessment. You get a technical interview and then the technical assessment. The interview is when they actually talk to you. You're with bug wars under your belt and these 3 topics, you're going to do awesome. The hard part is going to be the assessment itself. You got to be able to code at that point. Okay. So with that usually comes with practice with HackerRank and LeetCode and all those other things. And all right, let's go ahead and get started then. So I was trying to think of what kind of a project can we do to really come up with. I want to come up with a project that will allow us to handle REST API, do all the 3 topics basically. And so I thought of a family tree. So we're going to make an app that maps different family members, and then we're going to try to do it in a RESTful manner. Okay. So first, we're going to let me just create the model real quick. So models, and by the way, I went to Spring Initializer. These are the options that I used. If you want to follow along, but basically, well, I mean, you can follow along, but you don't have to like with code. But it should be very straightforward. It should be very similar to what you guys have done with your projects: Lombok, Spring Web, Spring JPA, H2, and the Postgres driver. So we can. That's what we're building off of. All right. So first things first, we're gonna make a model. I'm gonna put my person into the model here, and inside of the model, you guys can feel free to speak up and let me know what you guys want to add to the model itself. So what I wanted to do here is I made an @data. I had a person with a first name, last name, birth date, and then we have a father and a mother. Before we do that, because we're already going into one-to-many and many-to-many and all that stuff, I'm going to go ahead and just comment these out. We can address those later. For now, we're just going to talk about REST API. But is there anything else that you guys want to add to this?
Middle name.
Middle name? Oh, shoot. Of course. Anything else? How about phone number? So now that we got that, let's go ahead and do @entity, because now we're going to convert. We're going to use H2 to make this into a database. And let me go ahead and run this. Why aren't you allowing me to run? That's weird. Enable annotation processing for Lombok. Let's go ahead and get this run, and then we can visit it in localhost. So remember, this is all boilerplate stuff. I went to application YAML and I copied and pasted this configuration from my other repos. This is what allows you to enable the H2 console so that you can actually look at the database while it's running. And let's see if it broke. It should be running. Oh, okay, we got something here. Person has no identifier. Oh, you guys should call me out on that. There's no. What do you think the issue is here? The command is, or the error is, has no identifier. What do you think the issue is here?
Oh, you need a primary key somewhere?
Yeah, you need a primary key, and it literally tells you this: no identifier. Entity class must declare or inherit at least one ID or embedded property. So let's go ahead and do an ID, but let's see if we can do a UUID, because this is very common. So we'll call this an ID, and I wonder if you can generate this. So generate a value, and it's going to be an identity. Strategy equals identity. There you go. All right, so let's see if this works. Let's go back and rerun this. Yeah, with the father and mother person, we're going to definitely be going into the weeds with that because it's a self-referencing. It's a self-referencing field, right? It's going to be awesome. JDBC SQL feature not supported. Feature not supported. UUID. I guess H2 does not support UUID. Let's Google that real quick. H2 UUID generated type. Let's see what it says. Generate each topic. Nope. Oh, generator UUID. Generator. Geez, you got to do all of this? That's pretty cool, but we want to do it or not? No, we don't want to do this.
So why would you want to use a UID for it?
So the thing is, the reason you want to use a UUID is because if you use a long, people can predict your table results. So they can go back and look at 1 through 10,000, and they can just ping your site for those IDs or with random numbers, and they can then figure out like how many records you have. It just gives them extra clues. Whereas if you do a UUID, it's randomly generated and pretty much evenly distributed, and so you're not gonna. There's no way to like figure out who's what or what exists or whatever. So that's why they move towards that. But we can do this. I don't want to. As soon as we start adding all this extra code, it gets more complicated. Let's just stick with what we know. So we'll just do this. So let's go ahead and rerun this. Okay, come on. Let's see. We got it. All right, looks like we got it. So let's go look at the H2 here. We should see now that we have our person table here. And now we can do select all from person. And when we run this, we have a birthday, an ID, a first name, a last name, a middle name, and a phone number. Cool. So we got it. I don't know why the ID was there, though. That's weird. Okay, cool. So what we want to do now is let's talk about REST API. All right, so what is REST API? REST API is an application programming interface. Okay, you guys know what that is, right? It's an application programming interface, API or web API that conforms to the constraints of REST architectural style. So it's a convention. It conforms to the constraints of a REST architectural style and allows for interaction with RESTful web services. REST stands for Representational State Transfer and was created by computer scientist Roy Fielding. Okay, so it's a set of architectural constraints, not a protocol or a standard. So API developers can implement REST in a variety of ways. So first thing you're going to walk away from with this is that REST is, they say it's not a protocol or standard, it's a convention. It's a way of representing your API, but it's not coded for you. You have to code it, okay? You have to follow the standard, or it says it's not a standard. You have to follow the convention, okay? So this is not automatically created for you. This is just the convention, okay? So when a client service is made via a RESTful API, it transfers a representation of the state of the resource to the requester endpoint. This information or representation is delivered in one of several formats via HTTP. So the most common one is JSON. What this is basically saying is the way your API represents the data, or the way the API presents the data, is through one of these: JSON, HTML, XLT, Python, PHP, or plain text. For the most part, it's always going to be JSON, okay? Something else to keep in mind, headers and parameters are also important in the HTTP methods of RESTful API HTTP requests, as they contain important identifier information as to the request metadata. Yes, so this could, I mean, you can go back and read this for the interview portion itself, or to get yourself more acquainted with this, but your headers are helpful, but they're more used for like authentication and getting more information about the request. It's also used to send parameters to a server that, like special parameters that they need. But that's all you really have to know about the headers. In order for an API to be considered RESTful, it has to conform to these criteria: a client-server architecture made up of clients, servers, and resources with requests managed through HTTP. Okay, so in English, basically, back in the day, like a few decades ago, there was what's called SOAP APIs. So if you look up SOAP, SOAP API, Simple Object Access Protocol Application Programming Interface, is the standard messaging protocol that operating systems use to communicate via hypertext transfer protocol. Okay, so basically, the problem with SOAP is look how complicated it is. As data gets transferred over, the SOAP standards and the way you define your APIs were different across multiple companies. Okay, so even though it looks like it's structured here, everybody would have different ways of getting like the vehicles or getting like their widgets. So there were different ways of interacting with widgets, different way of interacting with your vehicles, with your tweets, with profiles. Like the data was it's just a mess. Everybody had their own way of implementing things, and so REST, everybody came together pretty much, and they're like, you know what, we need to like organize ourselves here. We need a better way to write our APIs so that they're more intuitive and that there's less of a learning curve to them. And so that's what REST is. Okay, so it's just like a convention that if you follow it, and if somebody says that they're a RESTful API, then you're guaranteed that they are following the criteria, and then you can then understand how to process it better, or how to like use it and apply it better. So let me give you an example. So in SOAP, or let's not even, I don't even want to say SOAP. Let's look into our controller here. So when you go over here to common interview topics, right? And we have a person here, right? We can go to, let's create a controller, and I'm going to show you the differences. So I'm going to go to package here, and I'm going to do controller. And inside of the controller, we're going to create our person controller. Okay, so let's say I'm Facebook 20 years ago, right? And I want to be able to give out my person data through an API so that other people can use it, consume it, and hopefully make my site more popular. So you can write an endpoint like get mapping, right? And then I can do something like get person, like this, right? And then I'll do public void get person. And let's say I'll make it so that I'll get person / and then I'll pass in the ID here. So then here what I'll do is I'll do path parameter, path variable, and it's going to be a long ID. And in here we're going to get it from our service. Oh, person. So let's go ahead and set that up. Let's set up a repo real quick. Let me just make this person repository. And here it's going to be an interface. It extends JPA repository, and it uses a person, and it's a long for the ID. Okay, and then once I do that, here in the person controller, I know we like using auto-wired. I prefer to use constructors to inject the dependencies. So this is what I mean by this is this exactly. This dot person repository is equal to person repository. Okay, and then I'm just going to create this field. All right, so now I got all of that, and then now I just got to add my. You can add. I'm going to use REST controller anyways, but it's funny because I'm not following REST with this endpoint here. Okay, so now that I have this, right, I can now do this dot person repository dot find by ID, and I can pass in ID, and I will then I need to have an optional here. And then I'm going to return if optional is empty, then I'm going to have to do a lot of stuff here. I'm just going to return null for now. And then if not, then we're going to return optional.get. Okay, so can anybody tell me what this is doing?
Isn't it just getting the person from the repository based on its ID?
Yeah, good job. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into open up Postman, and then we can go ahead and we can actually test this. And it should return an empty, it should return null. But here's the thing, this is not following RESTful API, okay? Because this endpoint is get person, or and this is what SOAP did. SOAP had all these weird method names, and people, the learning curve was just too much for everybody. So RESTful API attempts to make it easier. So to do that, the whole representational state transfer, they have what's called a resource, and so they try to organize everything as if it was a CRUD. So CRUD stands for create, read, update, delete. So RESTful API just basically organizes everything like it's a CRUD, and the piece of data that you are sharing, that is what's called a resource. So here, if you were wanting to follow RESTful API standards, you would do /person, or you would do /, it's usually plural too, so you can do /people like this, or persons, however you want, but all of those are valid. Okay, let's just do person for now because person sounds weird. So in this case, get mapping person ID is then supposed to get the person with this specific ID. And if it doesn't exist, then it has to return a 401. Okay, so this is the first thing with RESTful API. So first endpoint for RESTful API, get resource by ID. Okay, and then this is going to be part of the path. And it's going to return 200 and person, and resource, or 404 not found, and no resource because it's not there. Does anybody have any questions on this so far? Is this too easy for you guys?
No, that's good. Let's refresh, I guess.
This is helpful. Please keep going.
Okay. All right. So now that we have, so this is the first one right here. The next one that you're going to have is get mapping. Or can you guys help me? What do you think the next one is? Anybody?
What did you do? Get all, or is you ever
Yeah,
do
get all. Good job. So get all is basically just the resource name itself. Okay. So you can do public person get all, and then you're just going to be able to pass it in like this, and then we can do return this dot person repository dot find all, like that. Okay. Oops, not person. It's a list of persons. All right. Now, what's cool about this too, though, is usually you'll have like query parameters here. Okay. So what you can do now is you can add query parameter. Shoot, I forget the annotation. Param. Is it param? Request param. Yes. Request param, and then we can do like first name. We can do last name. Like this, right? And we can then assign them to these variables here, the parameters. And I think what you can do, you also have default here too, right? I think you have default here. We'll leave it like this. Okay, so what's cool about this is you're getting all of the persons, but with the query parameters, you're also assuming that you can then use those parameters to then filter out different things. So what you'll do then is you'll have a service here that takes in, so get records, and then it'll take in the first name and then the last name, and then it'll take these parameters and then filter out the data and then return it. So we can use this to, this is a good segue to using Java streams in our services later on. Okay, so we got that right there, right? All right. And next, what else? So we have a CRUD, right? So we have RESTful. So RESTful API basically is a CRUD for a resource. And then what's CRUD? C is equal to create, R is equal to read, U is equal to update, and D is equal to delete. Okay. So you now have create, read, update, delete. So back to my story, right? So all the developers are like, man, this is too crazy. These APIs are nuts. It's the learning curves are crazy. And somebody had the idea of they're like, we already have a standard. We already have a convention that has been around since 1972 or whenever the internet was invented. And there's like, it's the HTTP protocol. We could just use that. And so everybody's like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. So they went back and they started reusing HTTP verbs like get, put, patch, post, and delete. And they were using this new convention for the endpoints and using all of the HTTP responses like 400 bad request, 401 not authenticated, 403 forbidden, 404 not found. All of the 500s. There's other 400s that are crazy, but all of these error codes that come back and all these response codes, they incorporated all that into REST API. So REST API is pretty cool because it just reuses the HTTP protocol kind of like it was intended to be used. It's just before then nobody really used it, but it was already defined, and so RESTful API is kind of like harkening back to that and using all of that for everything. This is big picture stuff. If you go back, like at an interview, if you say this, you might get lost. If you go back and read with this context, it'll actually make sense, and then you can put that into your own narrative. All right, so let's see here. So we got read right here, right? Read's easy. Get is passive. Get is you call the resource name and then the ID, for getting all the records, you call the resource itself. So now let's work on the next one, and that's create. So the convention for create is, so let me put this note here. So this is get all records. Typically, we'll accept query parameters to filter records or resources. And then the first name, this is a example of query parameter, and then another example of query parameter, and then returns all records, all filtered records. Okay, and then the next one here is create a record. Okay, so this will require a body. So let's put that in here. So first, this is a post mapping. Okay, and it's going to use the exact same resource name, right? So the same resource name as get all, or the same endpoint as get all. That's what your create endpoint is going to be too. It's going to be post mapping, and you're going to have public person. Typically, you return the resource that you created. But what's cool about this is that it's going to have an ID at that point. So when you return the resource, it's going to have an ID. You can now access it. So we're going to do create person, and it's going to be not a request parameter. It's going to be a request body, and the request body is going to be either a person data type, or if you have a DTO, a special DTO, you can do person DTO like this. Okay. Why would you want to do that? So let's say we have our model here, right, for person, and let's say we now have person, father, mother, right? Like all of this stuff is getting pretty crazy now, especially so with the model. All of this stuff is getting tied to the database. It's getting coupled with the database, right? So passing this along as a JSON object might get a little complicated. All right. So what you might want to do here is you can do a new package, and you can just call it a DTO. And the DTO is basically a simpler version of your model that just makes it easier to process. Okay. So for instance, here we can have something like private string. We can just copy these right here, right? Notice how I don't have an ID either, right? So because it's the DTO, it shouldn't have an ID. It's not part of the database. It's just a data transfer object. Remember, DTO stands for DTO is equal to data transfer object, which just means it's a fancy way of saying it's just a stupid class that it just organizes my data. That's it. Okay, it's just a special way for me to organize my data. I'm mainly using this for JSON. Okay, so whenever the endpoint reads the person DTO, it's going to use this class to know how to extract the data from the JSON object, and then once it does that, I can then feed it into my model however I want with a service class. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. You don't want to include
Yeah.
other fields.
Yeah, so like we can do something cool, like we can do a person DTO here instead of a person. I return a person, right? Because I'm going to have an ID in there, and I'll have like mother and father. I might have all this other information on there if I wanted to, but to actually create the person up front, you like we might not. Maybe you don't want to have them set the mother or father up front. How are they going to do that? They don't even know the IDs for them. So like by doing person DTO with the body, you're controlling how that input's being fed to you.
And those fields, do they have like name restrictions? Like you have to use the same names as the original model? Like if you just
well, yeah, because if we can then do this service in our service, we can do service.create person, and then we'll pass in the DTO. So it'll be person DTO body, right? And then in here, in this method, we're actually
just be body. Is it just be body or person DTO body?
Yeah, you can do person DTO. It doesn't matter. So in here, this method we'll convert the person DTO into an actual person.
All right. Oh yeah.
All right. So DTOs can be confusing, but just remember, a DTO is not a model. A model is the difference between a DTO and a model. A model is tied to the database. It has that entity, right? It's got an ID that you generate. It has all sorts of other things like column, like I have like column name and all sorts of other things to kind of like make sure that the database schema is set up properly. Okay. If you start throwing in JSON models in there too, like you can do it. Like if you start doing like JSON properties and all this other stuff, like yeah, you could totally do that, and there's no problem with that. But there is a risk of it getting too complicated, right? And so that's why you might want to break it out where you have a DTO. This is how a person talks, or this is how a user talks to the controller, right? And then from the controller, it passes it back to the service, and then the service can then process it like normal. And you have that separation between the database logic and the front end logic, I guess, the controller logic. That's a better way of saying it. So in part of this README, kind of have a map of this. So if you go to, no, not on the help, it's README. So if you go here, you can see that I have a image here of the architecture, and this is basically what I'm talking about. So if you go, let me see if I can open this up. your controller. So this is how the application is broken down. You're gonna have your controller. The controller is like a waiter, right? Or he's at the front desk. He takes in JSON requests and he converts them either to a DTO or a model. Okay. Here I put down a DTO, and all a DTO is just a special way of organizing your data. All right. And then once you do that, it gets sent to the service. The service is your brain. The service is the guy in control of everything. It's all business logic. The service doesn't care about HTML or SQL or REST template or API calls. Like all that stuff's too technical. The boss man does not want to hear about that. He just needs to understand what the logic is, and he processes it. So whenever he has to deal with crazy stuff like HTTP, he's a normie. Like just imagine the service as a normie. The normie does not want to deal with any other technical stuff, right? So if you want to connect to the database, you talk to your DAO, your data access object. So this guy is the one that talks to the database, gets the data, and then passes it back to the service. If the service wants to talk to another API, like a stock market exchange or the movie database or whatever, you're gonna have to talk to it through HTTP protocol, right? Service does not want to know about that. He tells the client, please talk to them, give me the data I need, and then pass it back. So that's the DTL right here. When the service is done processing data and he wants to give it back to the user, he then provides that data as a DTO to the waiter, the controller, and then the controller just gives it back. Okay. The controller is a translator too. So if the business service does not have the data, right? Remember, the business service does not care about HTTP or anything like that. He just tells the controller, I don't have the data. And then the controller will then create the response and say, okay, I have to create an error 404 now because we do not have that data. It's missing. And then he will then tell the user the appropriate response. Any questions on this?
So as a controller, is that where you have your throws exception, or is that
service will throw the exception,
service throws it,
and then the controller will capture it and then figure out what kind of response to do with
that
it.
HTTP response? Yeah,
what kind of HTTP response. So I know I'm going off, I'm a little bit off topic here, but I think it's important to explain all this because when you're writing RESTful API services, it kind of like once you understand this flow, you're like, oh, okay, cool, this is easy. And I don't know if you guys remember the interview that we had with my cousin Juan Luis. He literally wrote CRUDs. Like he wrote like 10 to 20 CRUDs over and over and over and over again until he mastered the heck out of it with tests, and he was able to land the interview very easily at that point. So this is why I'm covering all this, because I want to make sure that everybody really can master it. And we can make it like a 2-3 part series or whatever, just as long as everybody understands how the RESTful API is supposed to work, right? And then from there, if you can code it, because remember, it's just a standard. It's not, they don't code it for you. You have to code it to follow RESTful API. And then once you do that and you can talk about it from the controller to the service to the repository, you're awesome at that point. Okay, so now we have 5. So let's do the create person. So easiest way to do this is you're going to return this. Well, first of all, if let's do a person to make it easy instead of using the DTO. So we're going to do return this dot person repository dot create. Is it? No, what is it? It's save. Oh yeah, save, and then you're going to save the body. Okay. So when you create the person is going to go in here, be saved, and it's going to return a new person with a whole new ID. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at that real quick. So in here, I'm going to do API, and we call it persons, right? Person. I think I'm like people better, but how does it do like that? All right. So we're going to do localhost API person. We're going to hit send, right? And in here, you can see that, oh shoot, I have to put API. So let me just put that real quick. At request mapping. You don't have to put API, but it's kind of nice to have at the root. So if you don't know this, if I put the request mapping here, every endpoint here will start with API. So this will be API / person / ID, API person. And that's what I'm calling here. I'm calling get localhost API person, which is this guy right here. I want to get all the records. So I'm going to go ahead and hit send. And oh, I have to rerun it. Okay, once we do this, let's go ahead and hit send. Come on. We should get an empty array. If it works, we should be getting an empty array. Oh, got messed up. What happened? Could not determine recommended JDBC type for Java type person. Let me take those out. Rerun it. Yeah, this is weird. How would you do that? That's kind of why I commented out, because I could already tell we're going to run into issues with that. Okay, cool. We're getting something here. Okay, API person is a bad request. Why are you a bad request? So 400 is bad request. Oh, 400 means that, oh, cool. I have to actually pass in first name. It wasn't optional. So these are the query parameters that we set up earlier. This should work and it should return empty. There you go. Okay, so we got to figure out how to make these optional. But what am I talking about here? When you go here to get mapping person, I have these parameters here as first name and last name. That means that you have to pass in a first name query parameter and a last name query parameter for this thing to even run. Okay, so if I take this off and make a misspell last name and I send this, I get a 400 bad request. 400 means the user did not supply the appropriate data. Okay, so Spring Boot is basically saying, nope, you can't go through because you didn't provide the appropriate parameters here. So if I provide the first name and the last name, it should go through now. and it did. But I want to make sure that we make that optional because that's not cool. We want it to be optional. So Spring Boot get was a query param optional required equals false. Okay, cool. Required. Is this like this? Oh, I guess they don't need a name. Cool. Okay, cool. So why does it need a name?
Is it because whatever you put in the URL path, it's going to assume the first is going to be first name? And then that's...
No, close. It takes the variable name and automatically expects you to type in first name. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Spring Boot. This is Spring Boot's weird because it actually uses the names of your code to write code. It's like what? It's crazy. So it takes the first name, the first name, or it takes the name of the variable and it automatically assumes that that's what you're going to provide inside of the query parameter. So if I go back, so if I do true here, right, and then we run back in Postman and I try to run this, it's going to did I don't know, maybe it didn't. Let's rerun it. So once we do that and we hopefully it goes through, okay, once we send this, it's going to fail us. It's going to fail saying 400. Yep, 400 bad requests. Let's go ahead and post this. I'm going to put in first name Jerry. I'm going to take this out because that's the only thing that is required, right? So I'm going to leave out last name, but I'm going to keep in first name. I'm going to hit send and it accepts it. But if I change first name and misspell it and I hit send, it should give me a 400. Yeah. So the variable names are important. Okay. And if you wanted to change, if you wanted to do something like name, yeah, you can do name equals first name like this if you really wanted to. So this is a good way of doing it if you want to follow this convention for the endpoint, but you want to use Java convention for your variable. Well, what happened? Oh, did it not run? Oh, it's not run yet. There you go. So it's able to go through. And let's just change it back. All right, cool. Okay, so that's how you would do this. Now let's create. So inside of the create, we're going to do a post here. And we're going to then do a body. And now the body, remember you have to go to raw and then JSON. Now the body has to match your object. So over here under person, we can change it to detail though, because this is weird that you're passing in an ID. Because you shouldn't, the user should not, because then that could be very dangerous. Okay, and then we're going to have an issue with the local. Okay, so let's see, let's just get this out of the way first. So we have our phone number here, right? 214-342-5555. Birth date, 1981, 0101. I don't know if this is going to work automatically. Maybe not. Doe, John. Our middle name is J, John. Okay, so JSON has its own rules, and I'm going to put an ID here just to be a troll. Okay, so ID, I'm putting in an ID. The first name is John, middle name is J, last name is Doe, birthday 1981, 0101. There are different formats for dates. So you probably have to specify to Spring Boot how to actually parse the date, which that's why I'm saying this might fail. Okay, and then the phone number, we're going to have our own logic to validate the phone number. But let's go ahead.
Yeah. So you can put like infinite number stuff in there.
Yeah, you can put infinite number stuff in here, but the controller will ignore it because there is no request param. All right, so I'm going to hit send. Let's see if everything works. Great, it worked. And notice, so a couple things. Notice, oh, cool. It was able to figure out the birth. It was able to parse it using this format automatically, which is awesome. So it's year, month, day. That's typically how I see the format. I think that's, yeah, it's ISO. So it's a standard to have the year, month, day. Like, so now if I go back to get and it doesn't matter if I have that query parameter anyway, so I'm not filtering. But if I hit get and I hit send, now I get a list of all the people, and now I see that John has been added. Okay, so let's add his wife, Mary Doe. Also 81, same phone number. We're going to hit post now because we want to create the record. And now when we hit send, we create number 2, and we have that. So now when we go back to get, I'm going to hit send, and we see now that we have 2 records there. Okay, and just look, I'm going to take this out because I want you to get used to seeing this. It's the name of the resource. Get, it just returns everything. All right. Oh, it's because, is it because I didn't take okay, so now she's first. Remember, I'm using H2, so as soon as I restart the server, I lose all my records. Now I'm going to hit get, and I should now return an array of people, and that's her right there. Notice how I don't need a query parameter, and that's because I set that required to false. Okay, so we got all of this here, right? We can create a person now. Following REST, we are and also the repository is kind of set up to follow REST too. So when you save, it automatically knows to erase that ID, replace that ID, and save it with your generate its own, basically. Okay, so let's go back to what we have here. We have create, so we've done this one, read, and now we're going to do update. But before we do update's pretty complicated. Let's just do delete because delete's pretty simple. Okay, so get by ID. Oh, I have to show you get by ID. So if you do get local API person, let's actually save somebody else. So we're going to save John again. All right, and let's hit send. So I did post on the endpoint. I'm saving John. I'm going to do get on this. Hit send. I see everybody now, right? 1, 2, like that. So if I want to access a specific person, I type in /1. So specify I want to access ID 1, and I hit send, and I should get Mary. And if I do 2, I should get John, right? If I do 3, I should get a 404. I have to get a 404 because that's following the HTTP protocol of the resource is not found. Okay, I'm returning null here. I am not following RESTful API. So you see that it's returned at 200, even though it didn't return anything. It returned at 200. This is wrong. Okay, if you want, I mean, you know what? To be honest, like, depending on where you work, you might not never even see a RESTful API service. I don't even know why they do interviews. Programmers are get it done type of people, or most programmers are like get it done in that, in these pressure cooker places, right? So they don't even follow the protocol properly. And so they'll say like, oh yeah, we have a RESTful API. It's like, no, it's not. You're not even returning a 404, or you have something like get all people or something like that, right? Like you're not following the standard that is RESTful. So you just call it an API at that point. But it's still good to know this because the interview, it's all about the interview. And if you have control over the API endpoints and you want to follow it because you're following REST. I mean, you're doing what you've been trained to do. So, okay, so yeah, so when they say that, automatically you should know it's going to be get post put patch delete. Head is for your headers, and options is options gives you like metadata for the request. I really haven't seen it that much, but just read up on it a little bit so that you know what it is. But it's not. It's just like metadata for your endpoint. So like, let's say instead of calling like get everything, like instead of calling like, let's say that every resource is like a megabyte big, right? So get one. So like you can do head one, and it'll give you the header information, so you don't have to pull all the information. And then the options is kind of similar to that, but I really don't know. I never even talked about it, so I'll leave it to you guys to research it. All right. So back to delete, right? So if you want to delete a record, you want to specify it by ID, and then you can just call. You select the HTTP verb delete, and then you call the endpoint. But unfortunately, if we do this right, we're going to get method not allowed. 405 method not allowed. So if you ever see this, that means that this delete is not allowed because you haven't implemented it. Okay. So even though this endpoint exists for get, right? I hit send and it works. If I try to use a different verb, like I'll even use put, I'm still going to get a 405. And this is Spring doing this for you. Spring Boot's doing this for you. It's giving you the 405. It's like, I don't have a controller endpoint for this. I have the endpoint. I just don't have the method for it assigned to it. So we're going to go ahead and implement the delete endpoint here. So to do that, basically, we're going to use delete mapping. You can see here that I'm explaining RESTful API, right, with the CRUD, which is very simple and very basic. But as you can see here, when you start getting into multiple relationships with entities, right, or with resources, like this is a site, and it's looking at the site with this ID, and then I'm looking for all the maintenances within for that site. But then I'm getting the specific maintenance object of this ID that belongs to this site, right? Like this is where RESTful API gets complicated, and this is where you want to just continue to research and just kind of try to read up on things. But you're going to find that there is like really no standard. Everybody just has opinions. So at that point, all right, so here, let's go to delete mapping, and then here we're going to go to public. You can return the person which was deleted, or you can return void. It's up to you. I think it's better to return void because you want it to be idempotent, and we can talk about that here in a little bit. So let's do delete person. Okay. And we're going to send in a path variable, and it's going to be a long of ID. And then here we're going to do this dot person repository dot delete, and then we'll delete. It's delete by ID. Delete by ID, and then we'll pass in the ID. So this is a very basic CRUD. This is actually very. This is literally this is a purest form of a CRUD, right? However, if you really want it to delete, you can do something like private boolean is disabled, like this, right? And then you can do JSON ignore so that people don't pass it in. So it's not JSON ignore makes it so that it doesn't get presented to people through the controller. But you can keep this field here as is disabled, so that inside of your controller you can then, instead of deleting it, so getting rid of the record for forever, right? I mean, if you're a company, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to delete your data? It's valuable. So instead of deleting it, you can do this dot person repository dot find by ID, and it's going to be you're going to get the person. Okay, and then yeah, totally. You can but if you don't care and you just want to make it a basic CRUD or like a true CRUD, then yeah, you would do a delete. But here's the problem with this: if you're now disabling it, right, you then got to update your query here so that you do a get all. So you're going to do, instead of doing find all, you're going to have to do find all that are active. So in here, in our person repository here, we can then do let's see here, list person find all is disabled true. I don't know if it's where, or we might have, let's figure it out. Find all where is disabled, and then is disabled boolean. Oh yeah, you can do something cool. So you can do this, right? Is it default? I have to put default on there. Yeah, okay. So what you can do is, instead of having to search for true or false all the time, you can just create a method called find active records, and then this will then call the other method that you use that you can pass in the variable, and then you can just hard code it in there. So I don't know if this is going to work, but if you do find active records here, when you go JP,
I don't think I've seen default.
Oh, so I call it stupid because Java is always evolving. They're always adding new features that make it non-Java. So like an interface was always, you can't define your methods in there, right?
Right.
Like if you want to implement your methods, you use an abstract class.
Yeah.
But people are like, no, we don't want to do that. We want to define our methods in our interfaces. So if you use default, it'll just do it right there. You can implement the method within the interface.
Oh, that's right. That's because the default is the counter to the interface.
Yeah, the default counter to the interface. Okay, JPA. I mean, they use active. I think I'm going to use active. Let's do that. So we're going to go to person here, and we're going to do active like this, and then it's going to be is active at that point. So here it is, find by status. I think that might be it. So let's do find all by status. Oops. Find all by active, and it's going to be active. So let's see if that works. I did JSON ignore here, so if we reran this, you're not going to see active in there, which is cool. Set active to true. All right, let's see if this works. So first I got to save the people. So we're going to save, oops, this is good. I can't call post on an API person 1 because this is a create. Remember, create has to be at the root of the resource. So I'm going to hit send. I created John. The JPA, the repository didn't complain, so it might work. So we're going to get Mary. So now we're going to do get all, and we have nobody there. Oh, it's because they're not active. It does work. They're just not active.
Is it because you set the boolean?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we got to set it to true automatically. So let's see if this. Okay, we got Mary. We're gonna put in John. Okay, now we're gonna get all of them. Yes, we got them. Okay, now we're gonna delete them. We're gonna delete number 1. Okay, and yeah, okay. So now we're gonna get them all again. Oh, it doesn't work. Let's see what H2 says. Okay, so we're gonna do select all from person. 1, 2, active.
I think it might be that in your delete method, I think you set active to true instead of active.
Oh, thank you. Good job. Awesome. And so what we would have to do though too on the get person mapping 1, like you got to find by ID, and they also have to be active. If they're not active, then they should return a 404. So it can get complicated. Not too complicated, but you still got to think about it. All right, so let's go back and look at Postman here and do it real quick. So I do a post. Okay, we got that one. Mary, send it. Okay, notice again that the IDs are different because it doesn't care, it ignores it. That's good. We're going to then delete 1, and then now we're going to get all of them. So if you get all of them, yeah, cool. So number 2 comes back, 1's gone. However, there is a bug in our implementation because if I call person 1, John still shows up. He shouldn't show up. He should be 404. Pretty cool. Okay, so now that we have this, let's see here. Think about network traffic, right? Like when you're making a request to another server, like when the client's making a request to a server, it sends the data in what's called a packet, and so the packet just has a few bytes of data. All right, and so the server receives these packets and it then processes them, and then it creates the body that it needs, and then it can, it takes the data and then it can process it. The problem is that if you have like really shoddy internet, or I mean, maybe something happened, there was a malfunction with the hardware or whatever, or the client had to resend the packet again for whatever reason, sometimes you might end up with dupes. Okay, so you might end up calling the server with delete record 5, delete record 5, delete record 5 3 times in a row. Okay, and so it's very confusing if it return an idempotency means that sending the same request multiple times will produce the same result without changing the state of the server or the resource. Okay, I like this definition. Stick with this definition, but there are times I've seen where it doesn't seem like that's the case, and so. But let me just explain the general concept of it, okay? It's exactly what this is. So sending the same request multiple times will produce the same result without changing the state of the server or the resource. So what does that mean? That means that you can hit a database, or you can hit like a server 500 times with this call and nothing happens, basically. Okay, so a good example of idempotency is a get. So if I'm getting a record or I'm getting a resource from a server, I'm not changing anything. It's very passive. I just get the resource and I look at it. I want to be able to delete the server, but by making it idempotent, like think about it. A delete call is idempotent because if I just called delete 1 and then I erase it the first time, I erase the record. But then if I call it the second, third, and fourth time, I still have the same result. The record doesn't exist, right? Like the state of the server is still consistent. It's the state of it without the record there, without the resource there, I mean. So like idempotency is also another good interview question that they like asking. They first ask, what is idempotency? Basically, idempotency is it's when you call something multiple times and you don't change the result, okay? Or change the state of the server if you want to be like more explicit about it. More specific, I mean. And you want to come up with examples of it. So good examples of idempotent calls are delete is one, get is another one. Those are easy ones, and put is another one. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So delete, get, and put are your idempotent ones.
Why not post?
Because you're creating a whole new record.
even though duplicate information, you just
Oh,
create
yes.
multiple dupes.
You'll do, yeah. You'll be, if you do
Wow.
post, like bot, like, yeah, I can do that right now. So if I go here and I do post and we do this, I'm just going to create a bunch of them.
So if you have like lag in your connection, and then
Yes. Yeah, you can. Oh, look. What? We got a bug here. So if I keep hitting 5, like, look at this. If I keep trying to send it, instead of becoming a post or a create, it's now updating my Mary here. So like if I change this to John, or let's say Andrew, if I change this to Andrew and I hit send, right? It now changed the record of 5. So if I do /5 here and I do get, so this is a bug. When I do get 5, I see that Andrew was changed.
does that mean
Interesting.
it's acting like a patch?
Yeah, it's acting like a put, or it's acting like an update. It's acting like an update. So what we need to do to fix that is go to our post mapping here, and all we got to do is, this is why you use a DTO, by the way. But instead of that, we're going to do body equals null, or body dot set ID. Yep. Oh, it created one. It erased it. But let's just keep going. So 3, 4, 5. Yep, 6, 7, 8. So it's not creating a bunch of records. So yeah. So good question. Post is not item point, because if you keep hitting multiple calls, it's going to keep changing the state of your server. However, if you do delete, like if I do delete 1, and I keep calling it, it's always just going to return void, which we want. It's always going to return 200, which we want, even though it doesn't exist anymore because I deleted it. It should always return to 200. So this is item point. If I do get all records, all right, awesome. Okay, so we covered create, read, delete. Now we're going to work on update. So there are 2. This is my favorite. Update. There's 2 different ways of doing update. Okay, so you're going to want to do it with person / ID, like this, right? And it's going to be public person. I like calling it replace person. And then we're going to do a request body, and it's going to be person body. And then in here, we're going to return the person that we updated. And then for the patch, it's going to be a different way of updating. And it's going to be /person. Also it's going to be the same input as the put, right? And this one's going to be public person update person. Update person by field, I guess would be a better name. And then it's going to be request body, person body. And then we're going to return the updated person. Okay, so a put is easy. Basically, what you got to do. Oh, shoot. The ID has to also be passed in. So this is going to be called a request param. No, path param. I'm sorry, path param, and it's going to be ID, and we're going to make it a long ID. Okay, so did I do that right? Path param. Why is it's path variable? My bad. Okay, so we have that, and then we're going to have that in here as well. Okay, so remember, we need these because the ID is being provided in the path. So that's why we have a path variable. So check this out. If I'm trying to replace the person with a put, basically what I'm doing is whatever the user's giving to me, I am going to save that person at this ID. Okay. But here's an issue. What happens if somebody puts an ID of 5 in here? But I can show you an example where it does break. So if we take that off, and then we're going to hit. Okay. So in here, you're going to have put. Oh, first we got to save our person. So post. We're going to save Andrew to 5. But remember, the create is going to make him ID 1. There you go. And so when I do get 1, I should now get Andrew, right? But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a put. And instead of Andrew, I'm going to do Mary J. Blythe, like this. And then the birth date will be 1985. Different phone number, 7777. Okay. So can anybody explain to me what happened here? I threw a 5 in, and then it came back with the 2.
It just created it because it just did a post with.
Yeah, it's basically like a post. Oh, this is
So
good.
does it use your post method when it does that? Is it
No.
automatic?
It just saved it automatically right here.
Oh, it says. Oh,
Yeah, I had a 5 in
see.
there, and then I saved it, which means it creates. So person repository is nice because it either creates or updates, right?
Yeah. Okay.
But remember, with a put, if you're trying to replace it, so this is, I forgot to mention this. If you're trying to replace a record, you want to replace it at ID 1. But what happens if it doesn't exist? If it doesn't exist, it should return an error. It should be like, no, you can't do that. So let's do that real quick. I'm gonna do. This is good segue. So we're gonna do response entity here, and I'm gonna in my response entity, I'm gonna pass back a person. Okay. And then what I'm gonna do here. By the way, I am giving you bad habits here. You got like me putting the logic here in the controller. The controller's job is not to do this stuff. When we go into Java streams, we can break it down into service itself, and then you guys will see what I'm talking about. But for now, let's just continue with this. So so first things first, let's find it. Let's find this person. So person repository dot find by ID. So I'm kind of already breaking my example here because this thing's all host, right? So we need to find by ID first, right? And either which ID are we going to pick? Are we going to pick the ID that's in the body, or are we going to pick the ID that's being provided by the path itself? I think you guys get the point. So let's just skip ahead and pick the ID in the path itself. Okay. So this in RESTful API, this ID trumps anything else. Okay. Yeah. So we're going to find the ID based on this ID, and we're going to see if this person actually exists. So we're going to do an optional here. And if you guys are not familiar with an optional is just a basket. It literally is just a basket that holds a person in it. So person repository find by ID returns this basket with the person, and then we check to see if the basket's empty. So what don't you like about this? Oh, it's like this. Sorry. There you go. So, and then we're going to pass in. Okay, I guess I'll just do it the regular way. I'm just going to do HTTP status in here. There you go, like that. And I think you're supposed to pass in. No, you're not supposed to throw. No wonder I was confused. Return. So return. Let's see if I can use a shortcut again. So response entity works like this. Response entity is a wrapper that Spring Boot uses so that you can then assign different status codes to it. But what's cool about it is you can also pass in your object as well. So instead of returning person repository save body, like you see how this person is, it doesn't like it. It's because you're supposed to be returning a response entity person, not a person. So to do this, I'm going to return a new response entity. Can I just do return response entity dot? Okay, there you go. I'm going to do response entity required type person response entity person and return this. Can we cast it? Okay, we casted it. Any questions on here? I know I was going fast. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to do a new response entity, and we're going to pass in HTTP status dot not found like that. So there's two ways of doing it. You can use a shortcut or you can do it this way. I'm doing it this way because IntelliJ is not complaining. So now let's go back and rerun this. So remember, if the person does not exist, we return not found, which is RESTful, and it should be a 200. So let's go ahead and do this real quick. So first of all, I'm going to try put and this. This should fail. It should be a 404 because we just restarted the server. There are no records in the database, right? So if I hit send, I should get a 404. I got a 404. That's great. All right. So now I'm going to go to a post because I'm going to create this person. And I created it at record 1, which is great. Now I'm going to do a put, and I am going to try to save this person to number 5. And I should get a 404 not found. That's great. That's supposed to be. I'm going to put a 1 here. I'm going to change this Mary back to Andrew. And we'll change the phone number. This is a bug too. What do you think is going to happen with it?
Oh, will it update the ID in the
Yeah.
for 5 to 15?
Yeah. So let's save it. And so what it created a 2 basically because it. So oh my gosh, we got to go back and fix this. So here, what we got to do, body dot set ID to the ID. Okay. Notice how the bitch logic is in here. You want your controller looking like this. Like you want your controller looking like that. One line of code.
So you would have another class, or how would you?
Yeah, you'd have a service. You'd have a service doing all this.
And you'll be like create or whatever.
Yeah, you'll be checking. You're making all the checks. They'll do all the stuff. And then from there, yeah, inside the service.
Yeah. Called like creating a person or something.
No, it'll be called person service. Oh, it'll be stupid. Yeah, it'll be the stupidest name ever. We can even put person CRUD logic as a service, like that, and then we'll put the @service here, just to let you know that it's a Spring Bean, and then that's part of the context, part of the bucket, and then you can put all your methods in here, and then
usually just give it a name of service at the end, just because it's like a.
Yeah. I'm just going to name it person service because that's what everybody calls it. This is the put mapping. A lot of logic in here. All right. Next is going to be patch. So I want to show you something else real quick. So if I take this off right here, right? If I take out the last name and I try to save to this, and I try to save here, right? Notice how the last name is now set to null. So if I go to, let me actually, this is still the buggy version that's running. I'm going to change it to a 1 instead, right? I'm going to call it with ID1, and I'm going to save Andrew to ID1 in here. Okay. So a put replaces whatever you put in here, it's going to save it. Even if you're forgetting a field, it will replace that field with a null because it's replacing the whole record with it. And that's also why the put is idempotent, because I can keep calling this over, or I'm going to be calling the put here. I can keep calling this over and over and over again, and it's just going to save this. The next one is patch. Patch is also one of my. So patch is a bear though to write tests for. First things first, we already learned our lesson, right? So we're going to do body.setID equal to ID because we don't want anybody changing the ID from the body itself. And then the way a patch works is a patch. Sometimes you don't want to update the entire record, right? Sometimes you only want to make an update to a specific field. So a patch allows you to do that. So if I take all of this out and I change this to Jerry, with a patch, I will not overwrite the entire record with null values. I will only change the first name of this record to be Jerry. Okay, so let me show you how to write a patch. So to write a patch, you literally just write if statements for every single field. And so first you got to get the record, right? So optional person, because it follows the same rules. If it doesn't exist, you throw a 404. So let's go back and make this response entity person, like that. Optional is equal to person repository.find by ID. And we're going to pass in the ID. And if optional is empty, not present, empty, then we're going to return a new response entity of HTTP status not found. Okay, and then in here, we are going to, yeah, we can put that later right here. So we're going to set the ID, and then we're going to do, okay, now we can't do person is equal to person repository save body, right? We can't do that. Well, actually, we don't even need this. So what you need to do now is you actually have to get the person. So person, I like calling them saved in database. We can call them saved in database. So person saved in database is equal to the optional dot get. Okay, so we looked in the bucket. The bucket is, if the bucket is empty, we return not found. If we pass this code, we know that there's something in the bucket. So now I get it. and I put it inside this variable called saved in database. So this is the person that's actually saved in the database, okay? And then I start checking the body to see if there are any values that have been filled. So I do if body is equal to, no, if body dot first name, get first name is equal to null, right? Or not equal to null, I'm sorry. If the first name is not equal to null, then I get saved in database dot set first name to body dot get first name, like that. And you do that over and over and over again. If body dot get last name not equal to null. That's why I'm asking if anybody knows of a shortcut to do this, because this is error prone. Set last name body dot get last name. Okay. If body.
So if they change the fields in the model later on, where the body gets extended or something.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's error prone. Save the database dot set. I'm sure there has to be. There has.
The phone number? Was the phone number that you?
Yeah, phone number. Yeah. If the phone number is not equal to null, then we're going to do save in database dot set phone number body dot get phone number. Okay.
ID.
We're not doing active. We're not doing ID either because we already have the ID from the person that we just grabbed.
Yeah, but don't you gotta set your body ID just to?
No, because we don't care because we're not saving the body. We're actually saving.
That's right. Yeah, you're saving person. Yeah.
We're saving the person in database. So we got to do return a new response. So this is another way of doing it. Let's just do person result is equal to this. The reason I don't like it is I don't like calling methods and other methods because if you want to add something to it makes it. You can just do it easily here. But if you start putting stuff in here and you start embedding things, it gets more complicated, especially when you're troubleshooting and debugging. Because you might have like multiple methods in one line, and then it's like, well, where did it come from? So first we got to add our record. So let's go ahead. And so, by the way, patch 1 should fail. 404, great. 404 is not found, so we're going to go to create. We're going to do a post. So now we're creating. We're going to hit send. Now that we've generated this, we're going to do a patch, and then we're going to change the birth date to 12/12. Okay, and we're going to delete all this. We won't even leave the ID. The ID gets ignored, by the way, because we don't check it in our code, right? So the ID gets ignored, which it should be, always should be. And then we're going to do person 1. I'm going to change the ID to 17. It should be ignored, by the way. So we're going to update, and we only passed in one field. The ID was ignored, but to make it an appropriate ID, we'll take out the ID, then we'll hit send here. This whole ID thing is pretty crazy, right? We got 15 minutes. This whole ID thing is pretty crazy. So let's use a DTO instead, so I can show you what the DTO does. So with the DTO here, we now have first name, middle name, last name, birthday, and phone number, right? But we do not have an ID here or active. We don't care about these. These are for the database, right? We only care about these because these are part of the DTO. So, or these, this is what the user model. This is the information that's important for the user. So, in our controller here, I'm going to now pass in a person DTO body, like that, right? And then our ID. Let's do it here as well. Person DTO. We're going to do a person DTO in our mapping, and then in our post, we're going to do a person DTO as well. And is there any other? I don't think there's any other place that we need a person DTO. Okay. So notice that, notice how these are now flagged now. So this is cool though, because we don't have to worry about setting the ID. The person detail doesn't have an ID. So automatically it's not going to be, it automatically is not going to have a, it's not going to have that ID here. So we can just get rid of this here, right? The problem is that the person repository saves persons. It does not save person DTO. So we're going to need some sort of converter to convert the person DTO into a person, okay? So there's a lot of ways of doing this, but let me get rid of all these right here because we don't need this guy here, right? We don't need. Yep, that's it. So now we got rid of a bug, or we got rid of a potential bug because we made it so that people can't even pass in an ID because we're now using the person DTO. Okay. Now, the problem is that a person DTO, Java's not smart. Java doesn't realize that person DTO is also a person. It just thinks it's another class, right? So that's why it's like I can't make from DTO. Right? We can do it here, like from DTO like this, and then here we will then set up a person is equal to new person. So we're creating a whole new person object, and let's call this a DTO. And then I'm going to set everything. So I'm going to do person.first name is equal to DTO.get first name. Person.middle name is equal to DTO.get middle name. This is called mapping, by the way, and there are libraries out there that do this in shortcuts for you. But I mean, you really can't beat this. It's pretty straightforward. .birthday is equal to DTO.get birthday, and then person.phone number is equal to DTO.get phone number. Like I said, there's multiple ways of doing this. You can use a constructor. You can use a static method like this. You can create it from the person DTO. Like there's all sorts of ways of doing it. You basically, the question is like, where do you put it, right? Like where do you put all this data? And so that's the hard part. Like I don't know where you would want to put this information. Does that make sense? This is called a factory method. So it's just a method that creates a person for you. And it's not a constructor. And so now that we've done this, our code's pretty much, it's still readable because it's saying from. The only problem is that our ID is not set. Because remember, we're creating that with, maybe if we do a constructor. Yeah, let's do a constructor. We're going to do a new person. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in the ID, and then I'm going to pass in the DTO like this. And then we'll go ahead and we'll create this constructor as well. and then we're going to pass in the long ID, but then we're going to pass in the person DTO, like this. And then in here,
So you're not gonna have a from DTO a static.
no, you don't. I mean, you could do it. Like that's how on the fence I am with it. Like you can go either way
Yeah.
with it. All right. So now that we have this, we're going to pass in a new. This is a body now. So now we're passing in a new. So we're going to save this here. So instead of setting an ID here, we're just going to pass in null because we don't want this to have an ID, right?
Yeah.
And then here, yep, we're good. Let me see. Update person by field. The body. Yeah, we're updating the body here. So yep, we're good. We're updating each field here, and then we save it. We save the person. So we update the one that's saved in the database, and then we save it. We then make sure to save it again so that it gets updated with any field that's not null. Yeah, this is great. Do something real quick with you guys. Okay, so now that we already showed that it works. Yeah, I think oh yeah. So basically, now if I do a put here, and I have a 5, I can't, or 6 there, I can't just put in ID. I don't even have to worry about that logic. That was the whole point of this. Like I don't even have to worry about this ID because it doesn't even exist in the DTO. The DTO will completely ignore this ID because it doesn't exist. So when I go here, there is no ID here. I'm now safe. Nobody can ever inject an ID. I don't even have to worry about it. And so the DTLs are very important. So just think about this. The DTL segregates the logic of this JSON object from the logic of your database. Okay, so for Thursday, I'll show you guys how to use Spring Boot's version of REST or of a CRUD, a RESTful CRUD, so that you can practice your own CRUDs and compare it against it.